Welcome to the UO Today podcast, conversations that offer a glimpse into the heart of the humanities at the University of Oregon. Listen as our faculty, students, and guests introduce ideas and research that help us reflect on the past, navigate the present, and imagine possible futures. I'm Leah Middlebrook, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. My guest today is poet Henri Cole, author of 11 collections of poetry and memoir. His latest collection, The Other Love, is forthcoming in summer of 2025. Cole has earned numerous awards and honors, including fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation, and membership in the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Cole has held teaching positions and been artist in residence at various institutions, and currently teaches at Claremont McKenna College. On April 17th, 2025, Cole gave a reading as a guest of UO's creative writing program. Henri Cole, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
I thought maybe we could open by just having you talk a little bit about your background and how it was that you came to be a poet.
Well, I grew up in Virginia mostly, and I was a shy young man, and I grew up in a military family, and my brothers were jocks, and I don't know, I was looking for a different way to be myself, and I found that when I picked up a pencil and put it to paper, I was much more sociable than I was in real life. I mean, face to face. I also had the advantage of having a couple of wonderful teachers as an undergraduate student in the College of William and Mary. And they helped me to sort of find my way through those most nascent uh, years of writing.
Do you remember some of the writers who called to you the most when you were first developing your craft?
Um, well, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure that anyone comes right to mind. Um, I remember my teacher gave me a book by a poet named William Meredith and asked me to write a poem after him. And, he was a gay man, and I wasn't really out of the closet. So maybe my teacher had some sensitive sense of my future. But um, otherwise, I can't think of one poet that did speak to me. In subsequent years, in graduate school, I was influenced, very much influenced by teachers with very strong differing aesthetics. And that has more to do, though, with style than with content.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, I was reading an interview, a really beautiful interview that you gave some time ago now, in the Paris Review, and I was really appreciating how you were calling us to think about Elizabeth Bishop and Marianne Moore, um, you know, directing us to look at what they're doing with style.
Yes, I really read them first in graduate school. I had a teacher, well, I had two teachers, David Cowstone and Richard Howard, and well, they were both gay men, in fact, but they were both really close readers of Bishop and Moore, and I really read them first in their classrooms. They were wonderful teachers, and they really taught me how to be a close reader. And Bishop is still my favorite, I have to say. I think favorite poet from the last 50 years of the last century, say. Um,
It took me so long to get to Bishop myself. I have to say my training is in 16th and 17th century, and then I read forward in time, for pleasure. And I have been so struck by how it is that poets who admire Bishop show me what to look for in Bishop. I think it's because perhaps because she wrote so very much, she has such a big uh, collection of poetry. But certainly I looked at her poetry differently after reading that interview with you.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, she really loved the 17th century poet, so it's not surprising that you as a specialist in that century would, she loved George Herbert so much. So,
Yeah, I mean, yes, that makes my heart swell for sure. Um, Building sort of on this teaching question, I was thinking about well, it's very present for me, the differences between sort of the 20th century moment that comes forward when you talk about writers such as, David Calstone or Stanley Kunitz, or, the people who were training you in graduate school, and then the moment we inhabit today. And I was wondering what it's like to be teaching poetry right now, and what it is that your students are looking for in poetry.
well, um, that's a deep question. I teach undergraduate kids, I teach 18, 19-year-olds, which is very different than teaching graduate students.
Yeah.
There is no professional dimension to, um, I mean, one or two of my students a year might be interested in going on to graduate school, but that's really the exception. So the great, vast majority of my students are really just looking. I'm really just kind of a helper in their becoming themselves, and they're using writing as, writing and reading as a way of becoming themselves as young people, figuring out who they are and what they love and what they reject. Um, at Claremont McKenna, there's a real emphasis on, economics and government, and many of the kids come there and then they realize they don't want to do what their parents want them to do, and so they find their way to my office door. So
Yeah, it's a long tradition, isn't it? That makes me think of, Ovid not wanting to go into the military and wanting to be a writer instead.
yes,
Some of
that's a
the
great example. That's a great.
it
I
it
mean, the
just makes me
students.
happy. Please go ahead, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, no, they. I like the example of Ovid. That's very touching to me. Well, I'm just thinking about what the students really want. They want to be nurtured more than anything, I think. And and I'm a fairly happy nurturer. So that's kind of my function. I mean, they do grow a lot. I find that young writers like that really do respond to nurturing. And they grow quite a bit, quite fast. It's like we go into this zone of positive forward movement, and that comes to an end abruptly at the end of the term, and then they go off and, I don't know, most of them probably cease to write, but still it's like a, they, I don't know, they swam in a river for a time and really were refreshed by it.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. Maybe we could talk about one of your poems. I thought perhaps you might be willing to read the sonnet Gravity and Center, which lends its title to the book I have in front of me here, which is your selected sonnets, 1994 to 2022. Would you be up for reading a poem?
Sure, sure. I'm just thinking a moment about this poem. After my father died, my father was an engineer, and I'd never really felt connected to his books necessarily. but I took a couple of his um, physics. I think they were physics textbooks of studying, and some of the language in this poem, I found that when I looked at the books, I felt quite estranged from them, but some of them had graphs in them, and the language of the graphs was very moving. And so there's this force of repulsion. Um, for instance, just to take a phrase that I just lifted right out of these graphs from those physics um, diagrams, really. Gravity. Actually, the title probably was also maybe the name of a graph.
Uh-huh.
So, gravity and center. I'm sorry, I cannot say I love you when you say you love me. The words, like moist fingers, appear before me, full of promise, but then run away to a narrow black room that is always dark, where they are silent, elegant, like antique gold, devouring the thing I feel. I want the force of attraction to crush the force of repulsion, and my inner and outer worlds to pierce one another like a horse whipped by a man. I don't want words to sever me from reality. I don't want to need them. I want nothing to reveal feeling, but feeling, as in freedom, or the knowledge of peace in a realm beyond, or the sound of water poured in a bowl.
Thank you for that. You have a large collection of sonnets. Can you talk about your relationship to the sonnet form? What attracts you? What might repel you? And
Well, I do believe in the principle that containment makes for power, that the bottle makes the genie stronger. And we live in a time of great discursiveness and prolixity, I think. The scroll button, is kind of endless. So I like the idea of seeing the beginning and the ending of something when you look at it. And I guess there's maybe a little personal component too, which is that when I was 45, that was a long time ago, I went to live in Japan where I was born. And when I was there, I was trying to figure out, what kind of poem I was living in a couple rooms, tatami mat rooms, and, I was living at the base of these mountains near Kyoto in a very simple way. And I knew I wouldn't be able to write, haikus and tankas like a tourist poet. And so I thought, what if I brought to what I thought, well, what is the shortest lyric form that the English language has a history in? Um, so I thought, what if I brought some of the qualities of Japanese poetry to these sonnets and stripped out a lot of the ornamentation and used nature and maybe occasionally was political and used symbol rather than realism and so that's really how that came about. And that's I mean, I was writing sonnets before that, but maybe they were in a more traditional fashion. But after that, I began writing so that the poems, they these sonnets of mine, they're not iambic pentameter and they're not rhymed in any traditional way. But what they deploy is they have these kind of fractures and leaps and resolutions in them that the sonnet form really encourages and enables. Um, Especially with the volta, which is the seat of change in a sonnet where some kind of knowledge is arrived at or some kind of reset occurs. That's really important and dramatic. And and I think I think traditionally there's just one volta, but I'm happy to have two or three actually, I find in a poem. So they're really maybe wannabe sonnets rather than true sonnets, or faux sonnets, or I'm not quite sure. I'm
Well,
not.
I'm one of those people who thinks that most things are a sonnet. I find many paragraphs to be a sonnet.
Yes, yes. Well, they are like little songs. I think when a poet writes in a form, well, at least when I write in a form, you don't want to lie before it like a great big steamroller and be crushed by it. I think you want to do something a little different. Um, Splash a little coffee on the form, and I guess I've splashed quite a bit of coffee on it, but
It's nice also the way you just put that. The splashing coffee I like a lot. I also think about the steamroller because often when I'm teaching poetry, we start with sonnets and we use the volta and the sort of the hunt for the volta as a way into reading form.
yes. Well, that's interesting. Well, I don't think I usually know my endings when I set off in a poem. I usually have a image that I want to sort of develop, and then the poem often takes on a life of its own, and I want there to be an element of surprise, and I want the writing process to sort of lead me someplace I didn't expect to be or go. Um, um, Reading that poem just now, I was thinking as I was reading it that it ends with this list of three things. And I was thinking as I was reading it, gosh, that's a device maybe I've used too many times, as if in freedom, and then there's three things. And that gives such a tight sense of closure. But that's like a trick that's in my little, you know, uh, altar to poetry. And I was thinking as I was reading it, gosh, I better be careful not to do that too frequently.
Well, I guess, yes, I talked about the attractions and the repulsions of a sonnet. The one problem is that sonnets do just insist on closing. So they sort of
Yeah.
set a trap.
When you have three things like that, you have to, each one, they have to really be fresh, and each one has to sort of surpass the one before. And it's easy to fail at that, using that device. But anyway,
I think one thing we can move on after this. I mean, I think one thing that you do so beautifully, though, at the close of this poem is, the sound of water poured in a bowl does, in a sense, open the poem up again,
yes,
because water sloshes.
yes, yes. Well, I like opening it at the end.
Yeah.
Um, I had a teacher in college that used to say end on an image and don't explain it. And that's sort of what I did. Um,
I'd like to talk to you about some of the poems that I hear speaking through your work. When I was reading this collection, um, I got to your delightful poem, "Mouse in the Grocery." I'm just looking it up right now in the book, um, and I got to the phrase, "A mouse wants what it wants." Let me see. Let me find the exact words.
that's actually the first poem in the unpublished collection that's coming out. It's the opening poem in The Other Love.
Hmm.
But there were a few of these poems that end the gravity and center. It would be the last little section of poems.
Yes, I found it. Yes, it's on page 143. So when I read "A mouse wants what a mouse wants," salt cured pork instead of soluble carbs. A mouse is like a heart. It sleeps in winter. I heard Emily Dickinson in there. I don't know if you were alluding to her, or am I just too saturated by pop culture?
Um, well, I don't think I'd make that claim that you're too saturated with pop culture. That's a kind of exciting thing to think about, but um, I'm not sure where that comes from. I don't teach Emily Dickinson, but I do have some poems of hers that I use in this intro poetry writing, and I wonder, do I'm not sure where that comes from. It could come from something I was reading, or um, to me, that's such a contemporary sounding phrase. A mouse wants what a mouse wants. It delights me that Emily Dickinson might have said that. But the heart wants what the heart, what is it? The heart wants what the
The
heart wants.
heart wants what the heart wants. And
Yeah.
it's a line that has circulated enough. It's been sort of, I'll tell you, the place that I ran into it, oddly enough, was in the TV series Breaking Bad, where a character says this at a crucial moment. And I thought, that sounds like a poem.
Yes.
And I looked it up, and it was Emily Dickinson actually writing in a letter. I don't know if it made it into a poem of hers, but then
Oh,
it's been
yeah.
circulating as a
It sounds
little.
very gay to me, you know, actually. But but I mean it's not, obviously. I mean, every heart is that way, but that amuses me. It delights me, sure. I mean, I suppose, I mean, I'm the result of my teachers and my reading. And, one of the processes of life is synthesizing all that one absorbs, and how it comes out is kind of unpredictable. Um, I wish I had the intensity of Dickinson. I think her poems are much more mysterious than I'm capable of being. But she's a good example of this bottle making the genie stronger. Um,
Should we look at another one of your poems in the collection? And then I want to hear a few words about your forthcoming book. But I thought
okay,
maybe we could look at the poem Bees, which appears on page 71 of Gravity and Center.
okay. So bees are a subject I've returned to a half dozen times or more. In my book about Paris, Orphic Paris, I have a whole chapter devoted to them, because I see them sort of as poets in a way, because they take something raw, as poets take experience. What do bees take? They take pollen, um, and they turn it into, they manufacture it into something gold, something sweet and gold. And in the way that the poet takes experience and kind of regurgitates it into sonnets or verse. Um, so, so let's see, bees. Poured through the bees the sunlight, like flesh and spirit, amidst a brightness, pushing everything else away, except the bees, vibrating bronze bodies, riding the air as if on strings that flex and kick back as they circle the hive outside my window, where where they are cheerful and careful in their work, their audible bee voices in solidarity with summer, as it is getting on, and all the leaves of the forest quiver toward nothingness on. Oh, this is a difficult poem to read. I'm just realizing it's one long sentence, and that I've got to sort of parse the sentence. Let me take it from the top again, if I will.
Absolutely.
I kept thinking, what am I waiting to read towards the mark of punctuation? And now I'm reminded that it's one long sentence. Bees poured through the bees, the sunlight like flesh and spirit, emits a brightness, pushing everything else away, except the bees, vibrating bronze bodies, riding the air as if on strings that flex and kick back as they circle the hive outside my window, where they are cheerful and careful in their work, their audible bee voices in solidarity with summer as it is getting on, and all the leaves of the forest quiver toward nothingness on earth, where we are all fallen, and where we sin and betray in order to love, and where the germinating seeds of the soul are watered by tears of loneliness, fear, and emotional revenge. Oh my goodness, you see the threesome at the end of that poem. You've
There are three big ones, though.
you've really exposed me with this poem. This poem seems to me very 17th century in a way. I'm not surprised you've chosen it. Um, I have a poem in my new book, The Other Love, called oh, what is it called? It's, when the Notre Dame burned, miraculously, these beehives on the front part of on the roof of the front part of the cathedral survived. And the next morning after the fire, all the bees, emerged from the hives kind of miraculously and went about their pollinating. So I wrote a poem about it, and just kind of in homage to the. It's funny, I've sent that poem many places and wasn't haven't been able to publish it either.
Huh.
But
It's such an evocative story. I hadn't heard about this.
it's called Brother Adam bees. That's which is the kind of bees that were there in the hives. They were named after a monk who cultivated them.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, there were three hives. There's a beekeeper on the roof of the Notre Dame, and that's well, if I have a bucket list, I think that might be one thing is to go up on that roof and see those bees. Um,
How extraordinary. So when they restored Notre Dame, did they restore the hives as well?
I don't know about the bees post, but I think so. I mean, I think they're really, I think, they're kind of famous, these bees. I mean, I think even the New York Times Magazine has done a piece on them. So, and the beekeeper is quite famous too.
Mm.
Um, I think it was a father and son.
Tell us more about the forthcoming collection.
Well, it's called The Other Love, which, well, I'm holding it here, I'm just reading what the publisher says. It's most of all a reflection on aging and the passing of time. And I think that's true. The other love isn't a person, really. It's more a way of seeing the world. It's a kind of attitude about oneself, a love of things and people as they are. Um, but also the poems are aware of a kind of violence in the world simultaneously, um, a kind of American violence, maybe, which I guess we're even more aware of now. It's funny that the book might even seem more contemporary than it did when I wrote it.
Mm. Does it have a particular place it's situated in? I think of you as a Paris poet. I think of you as a Japan poet.
No, I don't think so. It has, it includes poems from the last 5 years that I've written. I suppose that means it includes the poems of COVID, so it's aware of, you know, it's aware of COVID stuff, Um, I don't know that I have more to say about
Mhm.
it um, than that. Um, that ends with three, speaking to your suggestion of my conversation with Emily Dickinson. It ends with poems dedicated to Seamus Heaney, James Merrill, and T.S. Eliot, or poems meant to be in conversation with them. Um, and they were three poets that I sort of grew up with, you might say. So
Will you be reading from the collection this evening?
yes, I'm going to read a handful of things. Um, I'm going to read across 5 books, I think. Um, I came to Oregon 32 years ago when I started my teaching career. My first job was at Reed College. I think it was 32 years ago, about that. And back then, well, this poet, Garrett Hongo, was still here back then. And he invited me to come down and teach a graduate seminar. They were short a poet one semester. So I was here all those years ago, but I haven't been back since. So it's really, really a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're so delighted that you came, and I look forward to your reading this evening. Unfortunately, people listening to this podcast will have missed it, but they can certainly go and find the new collection, The Other Love, which comes out this summer. And I just really wish you a great visit and thank you for taking some time to talk with us.
My pleasure, Leah.
I've been speaking with poet Henri Cole. His collection, The Other Love, is forthcoming in summer of 2025. UO Today is a production of the Oregon Humanities Center at the University of Oregon. Thanks for listening.